Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just here to get started, and we have a few folks who are still joining us, but we will begin and get underway. And I will share my own view. Good afternoon, good morning. My name is Anne Harding, and I am the engagement specialist working with the Calgary Metro Region from HDR Calthorpe on the Regional Growth Plan engagement. So I am thrilled to have you here joining us for our first virtual open house. We're excited to try this way to connect with folks in a safe and socially distanced way. We have a number of different opportunities for you to provide input that I'll give an overview of, as well as go through a bit of the agenda for what we have planned. But I do want to begin by acknowledging that we are here gathered in the traditional territory of the nations of Treaty 7, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai, the Stoney Nakoda nations of Wesley, Chiniki, and Bearspaw, and the Tsuut'ina Nation, as well as the Calgary Metro Region being the home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So we are excited to have people from across the region join us today. Hopefully you were able to log in and register well enough with Zoom. We do have a recording. You'll notice this meeting is being recorded. Your chats are not going to be recorded and posted, but we will have this recording available on our engagement website for people who were not able to make it here live. So our images from the project team and our presentations will be shared. If you do contribute with a question or with your voice when it comes time for a couple of open mic opportunities that we have, if you do choose to contribute, your voice will be shared, but no other images will be shared online in that recording. So we have 4 different ways that we're looking for you to engage with us in this session. And so the first is going to be polls, and I'm going to pop that on shortly to get a sense of just quick polls of who are you, where are you from, what do you care about, and so just a sense of who's online here today. We also have the chat box, and so some of you have already been chatting with my colleague Lara, who is chatting away and prompting conversation. So we want to let you know that chat box is open and available. You can send messages specifically to privately to other individuals or to the full room. If you do want everybody online, both participants and our panelists, if you want everybody online to see what you're saying, make sure in the to box you select all attendees and panelists. If you just want to send it to the panelists, our team from CMRB and HDR Calthorpe, then you can just send it to panelists. And so that's how you can control sort of who's seeing what you share or what you're sharing in the conversation that you're having with the group. We also have a question box. So on your screen, depending on what device you're using, you'll see a Q&A. So you might need to hover over sort of where your mute and video buttons are. But the Q&A is specifically for asking questions. And we will have a Q&A portion where we answer as many as we can of the questions towards the end. So please do type in that throughout. I'll be watching it as some of our speakers are presenting and moderating a bit and fitting them in where we can, but we will have a dedicated question portion at the end. Where we'll look to that to capture the questions that you're wanting most to know about. And if we don't get to answer your question specifically in our time here, we will know that you sent it, and we do have your email address, so we can send that reply back to you and send the answer, which will also get posted online as well on the engagement website. So please ask questions. This is very much to ensure that you, the residents of the Calgary Metro Region, become familiar with the proposed approach for managing growth in the region. And so we're really excited to have you here and to also get your questions to understand what you're needing or wanting to know more about. The last way to engage, so I said there were 4, the last way to engage is going to be through an open mic opportunity. And so you can picture an open house maybe and see this as the opportunity to raise your hand and have the microphone to share your thoughts and your questions in your own voice with others. So I will be moderating that, and we'll have sort of 3 minutes here, 1 minute there. So we'll ask you to keep your comments tight, but we do want to give that opportunity to hear your voice. And so when that time happens, I'll call out for that a few different times. We'll get you to use the raise hand function if you want to speak. And so I just want to test that with folks. I'm not going to call on you. I'm not going to open up your mic right now, but just see if you can find a little hand icon and raise your hand. And then I'll put them all down. I swear I won't make you talk. Okay, I see enough people doing that. And then you can also lower your hand. And so folks are doing that as well. Perfect. So when the time comes, you know that that opportunity is there and that you'll be able to open your mic and speak. So I'm interested to get to know a bit about you before we jump into our presentations here. And so there's a poll now that's been launched. So you'll be able to see a poll that says, what's your favorite season to experience in the Calgary Metro Region? So please select the answer that best fits your interest. And I don't see anybody answering, so I'm hoping that that did launch. Says you're viewing the questions. Oh, somebody's answered. Okay, it's working. So I need you to actually select the answer. So, and you can actually scroll through, there's a few different questions here. So I'll read through the different questions and you go ahead and scroll at your own pace. So the first question is about your favorite season to experience, recognizing that one of the options is that we live in the Calgary Metro Region and they all blend together as I look outside at the fog and snow and sun. So the second question is asking what experiences you bring, or which term best describes where you're from. So rural, urban, or somebody with both rural and urban experiences. And it seems like some people aren't able to see the poll. It might have to do with the device that you're using. And so apologies. If you want to type in the chat, so I'll read out a few of the answers. So question 1 is, what's your favorite season to experience? Winter, spring, summer, fall, or they all blend together. The second question is, which term best describes where you're from? Rural, urban, or both rural and urban, or neither, you're not from the Calgary Metro Region. The third question is, how long have you lived in the Calgary Metro Region? So our options here are less than a year, 1 to 5 years, 6 to 15 years, 16 to 30 years, or more than 30 years. So again, for folks, you're typing in the chat, we have this record of all of it. So if the poll isn't working for you, please do follow along and type your answers in the chat there. So the third question is how long you've lived in the region. And the fourth is your experience so far with this growth plan engagement process, which has happened through the project website. So the first option is that you've visited the site to register for this open house. You've read some of the FAQs. Have you filled out the survey, reviewed the discussion forum topics, wrote something in a discussion forum, or that you've never been to the project website? So you're just attending this without having gone to that site already. So perfect. Thank you very much. And we've got 70% of you having voted. And so we can share as well that summer is the season that most people enjoy. Primarily, we have 58% of people with urban background and 15% with rural and 27% with both rural and urban. We know that many people live in one part of the region and work in a different part of the region. So we appreciate that though you can hold both rural and urban experiences when you're sharing your views about the Metro Region. This is really interesting to me that most people have lived in the Metro Region since the 80s, more than 30 years. So I think that's great. We've got a lot of people with a lot of deep experience in this area. So thank you for joining us today. And then experience with the growth plan website. We've had some people who have filled out the survey, read the FAQs, reviewed the discussion forum, and some people who are coming to us cold, sort of not having reviewed or been to the site before. So hopefully when I get to the end and ask you the question about, did you learn something? I know at least 4 people will hopefully be able to say yes. So thank you very much. All right, I'll close down these polls. Okay, I'm just going to check my sheet and make sure that I've got all this housekeeping out of the way. The engagement website can be found, and Lara, I'll get you to post the Calgary Metro Region.ca. And so that's the website for the Calgary Metro Region, and we encourage you to visit there. It'll give you a link that sends you right to the engagement website. You're welcome to have that on in the background if you're tired of looking at my face or the faces of our presenters. You're welcome to have it on in the background and scroll through the engagement site. Maybe that will also prompt some questions that you might have, or you can look at some of the comments that other people have made in those discussion forums. So I'll encourage you to do that as well. Last piece on the technical orientation. So we did the raise hand function. You did well with that. We've done polls. And the last piece is just to let you know that when it comes to the open mic, and we do open that up, people will hear your voice and they will see the name that you have associated with you, but they won't see your video. So just to clarify that nobody can see you right now, nor will they be able to through the session. So the last piece, as I sort of transition and hand it over to Jordan Copping, is just for you to share in the chat box what brought you here. What made you decide on this kind of snowy Tuesday at lunchtime to join us? And so just if you can share a bit about your expectations for the session, what you're hoping to get, or what brought you here today. And so Jordan, I'm going to ask you to pop on your video here and to take over the screen.
Thank you so much, Anne. I really appreciate it. All right. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Pink slide.
That is perfect.
All right. Thanks so much. Well, thanks everyone for joining us here today. As Anne had mentioned, we're pretty excited about having a virtual open house. And I'm just going to quickly walk through what the Calgary Metropolitan Region Board is and what it is that we do and what it is that we don't do. And then I will hand it back over to Anne as we start into the open house for the proposed scenario that HDRC has brought forward. So the Calgary Metro Region Board supports the long-term economic, environmental, and social well-being of the Calgary Metropolitan Region by helping the 10-member municipalities work together. So who are the 10-member municipalities? I'm going to come to that in a second. So the board was formed January 1st of 2018 by the provincial government. The government determined who would be members of the board. And effectively, as we can see here, it is 10-member municipalities. You may notice that there are some municipalities such as Black Diamond and Turner Valley, I should say, who are not included on the board. And the province set a threshold of a population of 5,000 people in order to be a member of the board. So as you can see, there are 10-member municipalities. It's more than 9,000 square kilometers, and we have a population of almost 1.6 million people. So it is a very large area, home to a very significant portion of the provincial population. The board, just do a little bit on the structure. So the board is made up of elected officials from the 10-member municipalities, sometimes the mayor, sometimes a councillor. And we created a structure that has essentially 3 subcommittees. So a land use and servicing committee, a governance committee, and an advocacy committee. And these committees all meet, as the board does, in public. Since the advent of COVID, we have been working remotely, as a lot of people have been, and as we are doing today. And it is broadcast on YouTube. So if you feel like you want to participate or see what is being discussed at the board, you can go to our website, calgarymetroregion.ca, and all of our meetings are upcoming there, and you can link into our YouTube broadcast from there. So these committees have been working on a number of issues, but as we're here today to discuss the growth and servicing plan, one of the things that the committee and then the board did is that they came up with focus areas for the growth and servicing plan and also for future work of the board. And these 6 focus areas here are really going to help shape kind of the lens through which the growth and servicing plan is developed. So economic well-being, growth management, and efficient use of land, environmentally responsible land use, shared services optimization, celebrating rural-urban differences, and water stewardship. These 6 focus areas were also, the board had asked that we check them and see if they resonated with people in the Calgary Metropolitan Region. And we did that during the first round of public consultation, which ran through the month of August. So a little bit about what the growth and servicing plans do. So the original deadline was December 31st of this year. However, due to COVID, an extension has been granted until March 1st of 2021. The growth plan has to be reviewed every 10 years, and the servicing plan has to be reviewed every 5 years. So the growth plan must include policy for corridors such as recreation, transportation, energy transmission. It must have policy for environmentally sensitive areas, coordination of infrastructure planning, conservation of agricultural lands, and new settlement areas and intensification of existing settlement areas. So effectively, the whole purpose of the plan is to really focus on development and in the region. The servicing plan must support the growth plan, and it will include, or it may include, things such as transportation, including transit, water, wastewater, stormwater, solid waste, emergency services, recreation, and realistically anything else that is identified by the board. So as we're moving forward through the development of the plans and then past and implementation of the plans, any and all of these services where there is a benefit to member municipalities and the citizens in the Calgary Metropolitan Region could be viewed or looked at by the board for an opportunity to work together on a regional or sub-regional basis. So I think with that, I will hand it back over to Anne, because I know people are here to discuss the proposed scenario, not hear about the board. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thanks a lot, Jordan. That's great. And we actually do have people interested in talking to us about the board as well. I know there's some questions that were sent in advance, so we'll bring you back when we have the Q&A portion at the end there. So in terms of where we go next is the opportunity to hear from you. And so this is the part where if there's somebody who participated in the first phase of the engagement process, oh wait, no, I'm going to review the first stage of the engagement process first. So give me one moment here, and I would be happy to share with you what we did and what happened in that opportunity. So the first phase of the public engagement process happened in the summer. And so what our purpose was at that point in time, we had 3 different scenarios to approach growth and managing growth in the Calgary Metro Region. And so what we were trying to do, we were trying not to have people pick one specific favorite scenario, but we were trying to understand what people liked about certain scenarios and what they didn't like. And so those attributes that people told us they most valued or least valued, that was what we used to incorporate into the policy development. And so that's where we head towards the growth and servicing plan. But it's finding those attributes that gave us the input that we wanted to bring us to this proposed scenario. So online engagement happened. We had the same engagement website, and much of the content from that previous round of engagement you can still find on the site. So you can go and see the polls that were up there, or some of the FAQs that we had that described the 3 scenarios. Those are still available online. Originally, we had planned for a hybrid of virtual and in-person engagement opportunities. That was adjusted due to COVID. So we went fully online in August. And we were actually thrilled with the results of that engagement process. So we had 3,300 people who visited the site, and we had 1,600 people who actually contributed and were engaged. And I'm not sure and I suspect many of you follow various engagement processes along the way and participate in different public consultations. We thought that was pretty good for participating in August during a pandemic. So we were quite thrilled with those results and the quality of feedback that we got. And I guess that's something I'll comment on that we're seeing as well in in this round is the survey questions. For those who have filled out the survey, you know that there's a number of open-ended responses, because what we're really trying to do, we're not trying to get to like a quantitative 78% of people like this. What we're trying to understand is what your values are and what your interests are, because that's what's going to contribute to policy development. When we have decisions to make, we can go back and say, well, no, we actually heard that a lot of people want us to decrease sprawl, but we also heard that people don't want to have a lot of high rises like downtown Vancouver. And so when you give us input that is more descriptive, that is more specific, it's really helpful, because we can then use and reflect that when we're weighing the different choices that we have as we work towards the growth plan policy pieces. So these are some of the themes. I'm not going to read off all of them that we heard, but this is sort of gives you that sense of what came out. Now, certainly there was a diversity of views, so not everybody said create more density, but that was an overwhelming theme. Certainly having good transit, and people described good transit as being well planned and affordable. That was something that was supported. And so as you hear from Steve and Charlie, who will talk in a minute, about what is being proposed, look for these themes, because this is what helped us shape them. And so just wanting to sort of close that feedback loop and share how we used the input that you did provide, because it's really important. You're taking your time here with us, and we want you to know that we are listening. So the way that you'll know how we used what we heard, we've given specific examples in the discussion forums and in the survey. So when you go online to the website and you review, this is an example of a discussion topic. And I've just popped out this paragraph here that says, well, in the first phase, we heard people wanted to see more infill and redevelopment, but didn't want high-rise towers. And so this is part of how we've responded to that interest in what's being proposed. So you'll see that sort of filtered or woven in throughout, sort of a reflection on here's what we heard and here's what we're trying to do with that. So hopefully you might not agree with what we're doing, but hopefully you'll understand where it came from. All right. And so with that, now I'm curious, is there anybody on the call who'd like to share their experience with the first round, and sort of what brings them back to engage today? So anybody who wants to pop up their mic or raise a hand and share. And if you're all really shy, we'll keep moving. But I want to make sure we give you the opportunity to share your thoughts on that first round. Everybody's getting really shy. Steve, that means I get to go to you. And we'll put the focus on you next. So we'll ask you to pop your video on and pop your screen open and maybe give a quick introduction of yourself as well.
Great, thanks, Anne. Make sure my screen's up and share. All right, thank you. Hi, my name's Steve Power. I'm a project manager with HDR here in Calgary. I'm going to take you through a little bit of an introduction on the plan. And it's my
you were good?
My PowerPoint's up. Okay, good, thanks. Just take you through a bit of an introduction to the plan and specifically talk about place types. We also have Charlie Hales here today, and he'll talk a little more on some of the other topics in a bit. But I'm going to start off with a bit of a discussion on place types and how they work and what they do. So basically what a place type is, it's a variety of buildings and streets and amenities that we pull together to talk about, what an area or a place looks and feels like in terms of, the housing that might be there, the employment that might be there, that sort of thing. For those of you who are involved with planning on a regular basis, you may be more familiar with seeing land use maps where, the map for your municipal development plan, for example, is covered and every area has a land use on it. When we do a regional growth plan from a place type perspective, it's a little bit different. We're not trying to say that every square meter of land within the region needs to be covered by a certain place type, but rather this helps us guide where we like to see growth occur and the kinds of growth that we typically have. So in terms of the Calgary Metro Region, we've come down to 6 place types that we're using. They can be probably broken into many more if you wanted to, but these are the 6 that we've decided to use. And you know, we started out with a book of about 25 different place types, but that was really complex. We want to try to keep this simple. So the first one is rural and country residential. And, you know, we're looking at this anything under 5 dwelling units an acre. We think the average is probably about 1, but anything under 5 dwelling units an acre, and it can come in a lot of different forms. You know, your hamlets that occur in the rural areas today all have very different characteristics. You know, Langdon is very different than Blackie, is different than Bragg Creek. It also can be in clustered country residential, where you may have you know, a number of residential properties surrounded by a lot of open space or even agriculture, or it could be in the traditional country residential that we see, you know, places like Springbank, or even farmland, and you know, your residents in an agricultural area or on the farm. The next one, as we move along to the right, is a master plan community. And this is many of the newer developments, particularly within the city of Calgary, could be classified as master plan communities. These are communities with a little bit higher density, often a mix of housing types, you know, some single family, some multifamily, not usually a lot of high rise. Usually if there is multifamily, it might be in the form of duplexes or some row housing, and that sort of thing, maybe small condo buildings. And it also has some employment. You know, you'd typically have your school, but you might have a little bit of retail and that sort of thing within it. Moving along, the industrial place type, typical of what we see throughout the region already is in our industrial parks and our other industrial areas, and they have about 10 employees per acre, and that can go up and down a little bit. On this bottom row, the traditional subdivision, so your typical 1970s, 1980s even subdivision, you know, which you know, might have a curvilinear street network, you know, instead of just a grid. Usually just one land use, which is residential, often dominated by single family. Might have a little bit of multifamily, and you might have a school, but usually not a lot of other employment. The TRD, or city and town center, is one that you know, occurs a little bit in the Calgary area, and it's one that we're really, you know, sort of saying is something that should grow. The example we show there, that overhead view, is of Marda Loop. So that's obviously not a transit-oriented development, but it is characteristic of this sort of town center type of community, where we have quite a mix of housing types. Might still have some single family, but quite a bit of multifamily. Again, not a lot of high rise, might be 4 or 5 story multifamily, but you know, small lot residential, some duplexes, some townhomes. With a decent amount of employment as well. So it's a mix of employment and residential. The final place type that we've got is office and commercial, which is your typical office park. Now, as we're looking forward on this growth and servicing plan, the 2 place types that we're really trying to promote and see a lot more of is the master plan community and the TOD, or city and town center. These are the ones that are characterized by a little bit higher density, you know, not the East Village, Calgary type of density. That's a much higher density, but you know, something, as I say, that's a little more modest in terms of density, but increases the density of what we've typically seen. And probably more importantly, is characterized by walkable communities. So well-connected communities where your day-to-day needs are often within your own community. We do expect to see industrial continue to expand. And the other place types, we do expect to see them, but we see in the plan having less emphasis on them than we've had in the past. So these single use, you know, traditional subdivision or office commercial parks, probably won't see as many of them. The idea being the office commercial would get rolled into the city and town center type of development, or in infill. We haven't talked about infill, but I'll come back to that. Or even within the master plan community, we might see some office type development in some of those master plan communities. The final piece is around infill and redevelopment. And Calgary certainly has the highest share of infill and redevelopment. This is really where we've gone in and looked at areas. Downtown Calgary is a great example. Places where there's empty lots or parking lots that are often used as a holding zone are redeveloped into higher use spaces, or possibly places where there's been a reuse of the land, where buildings are used for something else. And that's where, so in downtown Calgary, for example, most of that would be taken up by infill. We wouldn't be proposing a new downtown Calgary level of development, but rather the expansion of what we see currently in the downtown would come about through infill and redevelopment. So with that, Anne, I'll put it back to you.
Okay, don't go away yet. I've got a couple questions that I'm just going to ask for clarification here. So I guess Jennifer is looking to clarify if multi-residential high-rises are on hold.
Not at all, and that would be up to each individual municipality to make that decision. Again, the regional plan doesn't dictate right down to that level, and it wouldn't be on hold. But most of your high-rise type residential, there's a couple of things that will govern that. One is the market and the demand for that, but also virtually all of that type of development occurs in infill and redevelopment areas. You wouldn't go out to a new greenfield residential area and put up a 20-story condo building. For the most part, I can't say that it would never happen, but for the most part, the market won't bear that. So the higher densities would occur with infill and redevelopment, mostly within our city center.
Thanks, Steve. And just a question, Patricia's asked if there's an example of where this approach, and I think meaning the place type approach, has been successfully used in Canada.
So I don't know that it's been called place types in the past, but there's many municipalities, and I'm trying to, Calgary in itself, talks about typologies of land use, and even the city of Calgary in their own growth planning has spoken about something very similar to place types and much the same idea. It's a pretty common approach. I can't pick off any off the top of my head in Canada that have relied quite as heavily on the place types as this one, but the approach to either using land use typologies, which speak to more than one type of land use when you describe an area, or a place type, which are essentially the same term, is a fairly common approach.
Thanks, Steve. And just specifically a question about the master plan community. So how large does a master plan community have to be? Alan's wondering.
Yeah, I don't think there's and Charlie Hales, please jump in if you want to add some to this. There's not really a specific size that it needs to be, but a master plan community has to be big enough that it can support some level of employment and retail in it. So on a small 10-acre lot, you probably wouldn't have a master plan community. That's where the traditional subdivision type of development would occur. But there's not a specific size. Anything else, Anne, that you wanted to?
Sorry, just I think so I'm gonna leave you for now, and we'll head over to an open mic, and we'll get you to stop sharing your screen there. And so there have been a few folks who have had some comments shared, and I'm wondering if anybody would like to share verbally with your voice. I guess how you see these proposed changes affecting your community, for better or for worse. And so an invitation to folks there. I saw a couple comments trying to sort of manage both, but looking for somebody who might be up for raising your hand and sharing your thoughts on how this approach might affect you. And so Gloria, I'm going to open up your mic and give you a chance to share with us. So you'll still need to take yourself off mute. There you go.
I live in Rocky View County, and I understand what this plan is trying to do. But I guess place types means rural municipalities have to spend the time and the money and the effort to change all their land use bylaws, because there is not a match in this thinking. And the second thing goes back to what Jordan said, and I don't believe any plan should be about development. It should be about environment first, air, land, and water. And if development should preserve that basket of goods, then think about development. It cannot be development first. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gloria. I really appreciate your comments. And Matthew, we've got your hand up too, so I'll invite you to share, and then Steve, I'll throw it back to you for any final comments, and then we'll move on to the next section. Oh, I have to allow you to talk, Matthew. There you go. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi.
Oh, I am sorry. I made a mistake. You'll have to do it one more time. Go ahead.
Hi. So I have a sort of a question about the idea for mastermind communities, because you mentioned that the part of the plan would be more walkable communities, but generally mastermind communities aren't associated with their walkability. They're more designed to be car oriented.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Matthew. Steve, we'll turn it over to you if you have any sort of responses or quick thoughts to either of those two.
Sure, yeah, very quickly, just on the rural side. Certainly, many of these place types are not applicable to purely rural environment, but the intent is that the rural and country residential would include a range of different types of rural place types, and it's not the intent of this regional growth plan to come down and dictate specific forms of development and forms of country residential, but rather the counties that have the rural residential areas can determine how they want to best apply those. And certainly they've identified things like clustered country residential is important to them, and also growth in the hamlets would be within those rural areas, although they may incorporate, in some of the larger hamlets like Langdon may incorporate some of the master plan or city and town center components. In terms of the environment, absolutely, you're right. Keep in mind that this is a plan, I don't think it was articulated very well, but this is a plan to accommodate the next 1 million people. So there has to be a growth and development component to that in terms of accommodating the next 1 million. But to your point, and I think it's a very good one, we need to do that in a way that is environmentally responsible, that reduces our impact on the land, that reduces our impacts, all of those impacts of urban growth, and protect some of those great environmentally sensitive areas and other areas that we love that we don't want impacted by urban sprawl. So, basically the question is, how do we get another 1 million people in here without those, and minimizing those negative impacts while we do it. And finally, on the master plan communities, certainly there are some master plan communities that aren't terribly walkable, but the intent is, and they tend to be more, those that aren't walkable tend to have more characteristics of the traditional subdivision than the master plan community. The intent is, and one of the things we want to build into the policy direction is to have a connectivity component to it that helps build the walkability. But the idea is that you have a lot of your day-to-day needs are within walking distance within that master plan community. Not saying that people won't get in their cars to go to work and that sort of thing. That's still going to happen. But certainly trying to create an environment that is more walkable than the traditional subdivision.
Thanks a lot, Steve. And so Patricia, Abdu, and Travis, I know we had your hands up. We're going to keep rolling along because we're trying to balance the input with the information sharing. So we're going to move on to our next section. And Charlie, I'll get you to pop your video on. Steve, you can take your video off, but share your screen. A little bit of musical chairs here. But for those who had their hands raised, please do type your question in the question box or send it to us in the chat. We want to make sure to capture it. And after Charlie talks about the transit-ready corridors, we'll have another chance for a couple folks to share their questions or views. So Steve, I'll get you to share your screen for that Charlie can speak to there.
Thanks, Anne, and good afternoon, everyone. So we're gonna, hopefully you can see me. Right now I'm seeing you, Anne, and my
You're good.
screen. Okay, as long as I'm present, we'll go from there. I'm Charlie Hales. I'm part of the HDR Calthorpe team. I'm based in Portland, Oregon. Most of my all of my regional planning experiences in Oregon, Washington, and Utah, and this is my first major planning project in Canada. So if you will, I'm a little bit of an outside view, and to the extent that that's valuable, hopefully I'm adding value. Second point I want to make, and just sort of reflecting on some of the comments and points made so far, is a regional plan is not a regional zoning map or a regional zoning code. So it's not expected that it gets to that level of detail, nor is it expected that it get implemented the same way in each of the 10 municipalities within the Calgary region. So be reassured that, at least to an extent, the plan will accommodate local difference. The other general comment I would make and reflect on my colleagues, Peter Calthorpe's frequent observation in this process is, you're really dealing with these issues from strength. First of all, the municipalities have done a good job so far in reinforcing their city centers, not just in Calgary, but in many of the smaller towns and cities in the region as well. I've been pretty impressed by what's been done. For example, they have a pretty strong form-based code in High River. So there's been good work done so far, and you have a compact region so far. Some sprawl, but not too much. And obviously the point of this kind of regional planning effort is to make sure that you get the outcome that you want with the next million people and not make some of the mistakes of sprawl and poorly organized growth that other regions have made. So let me turn to a couple of the components of the plan as it's developing. In the scenario that we are keying to, and that will be the basis of the plan map and of the policies that we're crafting, one focal point is transit-ready corridors. Right now, of course, there are some parts of the region, primarily in the city of Calgary, that are well served by transit. But a strong desire from the public that we've heard in the engagement process so far, and a direction from the board, is to focus more development around transit in the future. So the scenario envisions a couple of key corridors. I think, Steve, you've got the scenario map there ready to put up. Yeah, a couple of key corridors. And again, exactly where these run is not the issue, but that they are a spine or an armature of where growth is supposed to go is the point. So first of all, a corridor to the north, connecting Airdrie to Calgary through parts of Rocky View County. We believe that a good slice of the region's future growth should be accommodated in this area and should be focused around transit rather than relying so heavily on the automobile. So this is one of two of the three. I'll talk about the joint planning areas. One of the joint planning areas where we believe that organizing around transit is critical. We're not picking a mode. We're not saying that's going to be a light rail corridor or that's going to be a bus rapid transit corridor. That's work to be done ahead in transportation planning and in project development. There's a pretty significant governance problem to be addressed and eventually overcome, frankly, which is at this point, Calgary is the transit provider and it doesn't provide transit along these corridors today. Calgary and Chestermere have been working closely together on the potential extension of the transit corridor on 17th into Chestermere. That's good, and that's why that's another one of the corridors that we recommend as an area in which future growth should be organized around the presence of higher capacity transit. That doesn't just mean saying, please put transit here. It also means organizing density to focus around that transit spine and making sure, to the point that came up earlier about walkability, that there's a connected street grid that's sufficiently robust that it enables people to walk or bike or use a scooter or whatever other means they use for the last mile to get to that transit. Again, we're not creating a regional master plan. We're creating a regional plan. So there will be details that are not determined in the regional plan, like what exactly what the zoning will be at this corner or in that parcel. But the general concept that within 800 meters of a high capacity transit corridor, there ought to be a transit-oriented development growth pattern. That's something that we're recommending be a fundamental piece of the plan, that there be a connected and generous street grid that allows people to circulate by means other than a car in that transit corridor. We think that's a key ingredient. So these are a couple of areas in which we recommend that growth be organized much more so than today around the presence of high capacity transit. So that's a key plank. of the emerging plan.
Thanks a lot, Charlie. And so Steve, will invite you to stop sharing the screen there. And anybody, so we're now wondering what's exciting to you about this, or what's worrisome to you about these proposed transit corridors. So again, I'll ask one or two people to raise your hands, and if there's something around that transit ready corridor piece that you'd like to share or ask. In the absence of somebody raising their hand, I'm just going to pick out this question that I see, that there was a transit system in place through the On-It bus, and the province invested millions of dollars in the system before it was scrapped. So would that type of system be revised and revisited for the plan?
I don't know that history, and Steve might, but and I don't want to speculate about why it didn't succeed. But getting development to change around transit requires that either the transit be there or that there be a high level of certainty that it's going to be there. Developers aren't going to build TOD without the T. So there has to be at least a reasonable assurance that the region, whether it's through cooperative agreements between, say, Chestermere and Calgary, or by the creation of some new regional transit entity, the development community and then local planners need to know that we're serious. This is going to be a transit corridor. No, we haven't built it yet, but it's coming. And once you get to that level of certainty, then it's practical to zone that area for that form of development and start to see it, sometimes even before the transit line is actually operating. So it doesn't have to be perfectly synchronous, and it's certainly ideal if the transit is there first before any of the development, but there at least has to be rough synchronicity between saying that this is an area where we plan for transit and the provision of the transit itself. So again, I don't know the history of the On-It bus, but in many cases, people have placed transit lines or transit service where the form of development didn't support it, and they didn't get much ridership. That's happened in my town too.
Got it, thanks. And just one question from Alan as well around how feasible it might be to use the CP rail line to Cochrane as a transit ready corridor. Is that something that was looked at?
Oh yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. It is envisioned in this. At least we are likely to include in the plan, and then therefore a future regional transportation plan would have this as an element, that using the CP rail line for commuter rail service to serve Cochrane is a great idea and should be pursued. However, commuter rail is a really different animal than light rail or bus rapid transit in the sense that you have very few stations. And therefore you don't get the corridor effect of a walkable urban form along the length of the transit line, because obviously you can't get on the train except at the stations. So commuter rail works wonderfully well, and it might work quite well in this corridor and perhaps extend on to tourist and visitor and mountain destinations to the west. But you won't see a band of development running from downtown Cochrane into Calgary along a commuter rail line for that obvious reason.
Thanks a lot, that's helpful. Okay, so now we'll move on to the third part, sort of leg of the proposed approach, the joint planning areas, and sort of that concept as well that we know is happening in some parts of the region, but just sort of what's being proposed that sort of amps that up or makes that a key pillar of this approach. And Steve, I'll get you to pop that screen back on.
So this is another, and I've talked about this already in alluding to these two transit corridors. To our eye, there are three areas in the Calgary region where it's a multi-municipality environment. The planning problems are complex, and the development outcomes that are enshrined in the goals for the board might not be achieved without a higher level of cooperation between the municipalities. In at least one case of these three areas, there's also been quite a bit of conflict and appeals filed with the province, where one municipality disagreed with the plans of another. And obviously, if a regional planning regimen can improve on that and create a shared set of plans and agreements and avoid conflicts and lawsuits and appeals, that's a better world. So these three areas, again, Steve, I think you've got the map ready, are one, that Chestermere Calgary corridor that we mentioned with the TOD band in it, but also quite a bit of industrial and other development north and south of that spine. The second of the two is the other one I mentioned already, that extends north from Calgary to Airdrie, encompasses quite a bit of industrial development, quite a bit of retail development that's already occurred. Obviously, there's some development already in each of these areas, but we anticipate that a significant amount of the region's growth beyond existing city centers and redevelopment can be accommodated in these two areas. The one to the south is a different animal. It's the so-called AFICA, Alberta Foothills Industrial area, that is a shared venture between Foothills County and the cities of Okotoks and High River, in which a lot of the employment for that sub-region is envisioned to be accommodated by the industrial area that you see in that yellow area of the joint planning area, whereas neither High River nor Okotoks are planning for a lot of industrial or employment land within their own boundaries. So this is a joint venture of agreeing on where a lot of job growth is going to be, and then servicing that together. All three of these have the potential for revenue sharing from development or from tax revenue, and cost sharing. How far the plan goes in that direction is still uncertain, but certainly sharing the costs of servicing and sharing the revenue benefits of an agreed upon joint venture between municipalities is a good idea. It's done in other areas or other parts of North America. And I think personally that it's appropriate in this area. How far the region goes or the board goes in directing that outcome is an open question. So again, this is a process in which the board has some authority to craft a regional plan. We're trying to give them advice about elements that we think are important to include in that, but ultimately the board represents municipalities, and a majority of those municipalities need to support the ultimate draft of this plan in order for it to pass and to go into effect. So there's a real politic of how far does the region, through the CMRB and those of us as technical support for this effort, how far do we go in mandating change at the municipal level versus either encouraging it or creating a framework in which it can occur. These joint planning areas are ways to say, you will need to work together here, you will need to agree upon a joint plan, and then how much farther beyond that we go in the regional plan is, again, at this point, still to be determined, and would appreciate your thoughts about those important questions.
Thanks a lot, Charlie. That's great. And so I'll pop the screen off and invite those hands to come up and be raised, and specifically just what do you see as valuable about sub-regional collaboration or those joint planning areas, or what worries you about what's being proposed here? And somebody willing to raise your hand and share your voice?
And you also got some questions in the chat there too. So
well, there's plenty. That's where we're going next.
Okay.
Anybody want to share your thoughts or views? Okay, well, we have some very shy people in talking, but we wanted to make sure we gave you that opportunity.
Okay.
And so I think where we'll head now, we've had a number of questions, as you say, Charlie, come through in the chat, and come through the question box as well. And so we've had some of our colleagues in the background sort of working to put those together. So Jordan and Steve, I'm going to invite you to come back on with your videos. And what we're going to do here is a bit of a moderated Q&A. So I'll pull some questions from what we've heard. And as we're doing this, folks, if you want to jump in or it's not being clear or there's just something you got to say, please do be sure to raise your hand and we can come and hear that voice as well. So Charlie, question for you. Let's go back to the place type. So a number of questions have came through on the concept of place types. And so can you provide more information about place types, including densities, and what that it means for existing communities and regional servicing? And I think the servicing piece, I've seen some questions come through on that as well, and we haven't really touched on that. So if you can talk about how that weaves into the growth plan, that'd be great.
Well, let me start. Maybe Steve might want to add on. Place types for purposes of this regional plan are intended to be a definition and description of a form of development that we're then going to measure against. So we're going to say, for example, that master planned communities look like, fall within these parameters, include a mixture of uses, include a small amount of employment and multiple types of housing, and have a connectivity index that assures that there's a street grid that functions better than the caller or the participant noted sometimes is the case in existing master plan communities. So it's intended to create a form that, as Steve mentioned earlier, the plan is going to essentially say, in suburban areas, we'd like to see more of this and less of traditional subdivisions. In urban areas, we'd like to see more city center TOD form of development, more mixture, higher level of employment than in a master plan community, most likely connected to transit and higher residential densities. So the place types are broad categories in which that the municipalities will be able to measure themselves against, and that the CMRB will be able to evaluate whether their municipal development plan is achieving the goals of the regional plan.
Thanks, Charlie. Steve, did you want to jump in there at all?
Oh, I think Charlie's got it covered fairly well, unless you want to ask me something else.
Well, I'm going to follow up with a great question that Cindy shared, and then David, I see your hands up, so we'll go to you next. How does the plan avoid urban sprawl?
Hopefully by the means of focusing more development into transit-oriented development areas and corridors, in having municipalities agree on what these joint planning areas will turn out to be as extensions of the urban fabric of the region, and supporting, again, what's already going on in terms of redevelopment and infill, particularly in Calgary, but also in the town centers of the other municipalities in the region. So, more of the good trends that are already underway in the region, less traditional subdivisions, and frankly, not a lot of consumption of new land beyond what's already planned.
Thanks so much. And David didn't mean to raise his hand. So if anybody means to raise your hand, please do, and I'd be happy to open your mic. So keeping on the place type one, and there's a question from Alan that's come through, I just saw in the chat, around, so we have on the website, the place type allocation graph. And so that's the bar graph that says, here's sort of the amount of different place types that's being proposed for each of the 10 municipalities. So just is the question being, is that part of the final plan, or how does that connect to what's being proposed?
Yeah, it will be included in the plan. Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm not sure if I understood the question fully.
Yeah, and Steve, do you want to share sort of what that graph describes?
Yeah, sure. It really is just an allocation of what types of which place types will be dominant in each municipality, and It will get generalized out a little bit as we get to the final plan. The initial is the outputs from our modeling and our analysis. But as we turn this into something that is part of a plan, a statutory plan, it'll be it'll be a little more general in terms of its the numbers but we'll be quite similar to what's shown in the on the engagement website.
And so I guess a follow-up that just specifically on Rocky View, that there's 60% industrial, for example, shown on that. So just wondering a bit more detail behind that number. Sure.
There are both employment and population forecasts done as inputs to this plan. And so based on the employment profile and the types of employment that we expect to see, that translates into a place type in terms of what would support that kind of employment, and then combine that with how much employment we would expect to be taken up within an individual municipality in either the town or city center place type, or the master plan community, or the office commercial. Really everything else ends up in industrial. So we've done a little bit of split between the office commercial and the industrial based on the types of employment that the forecasts expected to see, and then really that then turns into an area based on number of jobs that we expect to see in that place type, less what we would expect to see in city or town center. So Rocky View, as an example, doesn't have as much city or town center place type as some of the more urban areas. So there's a fairly high proportion of industrial, and that is reflective of what the employment forecasts said.
Got it, thanks. So Abdu, you had your hand up before and I put it up again. So I'm curious to get your question or comment in.
Thank you so much. I'm in Calgary area. Just a question to Charlie in terms of government officials and how our area in Southern Alberta for our Metro Regional Growth Plan compared to the United States. So in the realm of public transit, mass transit, if you use California, for example, how the state controls the mass transit network within each regional area. What solution or obstacles, you did hint a little bit, that you think the Calgary Metro Region Growth Area Planning Group would have to go through to obtain, this skeletal network that could work collaboratively within every municipality? I know some of the questions in there is cost sharing. How is revenue stream collected? Who gets to keep the money? Recently, we've had some, sorry, I don't mean to ramble on. Recently, we've had some issues, especially with COVID, where to control population visiting other areas to utilize some of the utilities, then certain municipalities start to apply a user fee to external visitors. So Calgary cannot use the Chestermere Lake without having a membership. Same thing, how do you apply that in the transit realm? If it's one body, let's say Calgary is the behemoth who controls the light rail, and most likely will not surrender its right, and how do you have this cooperation between them? Sorry, I'll mute myself for an answer.
That's awesome.
That's a big one. So I mean, here's the process ahead as I think it will occur or should occur. One, the region needs to agree on a form of a regional form of where growth is going to occur, roughly how it's going to occur, how much organized around transit, how much refocused into existing town centers and redevelopment areas. So there are centers and corridors, to this plan, as there are typically. And then how much suburban style growth beyond that is anticipated. And then country residential, which is a factor in the Calgary region and a lifestyle. And something that the three counties feel strongly that should continue to be provided, at least in some measure. So first agree on the form. And now the form is going to include some transit corridors for which there's not an implementation mechanism today. So frankly, I think the Calgary region in the next phase of this work should do a regional transportation plan and address that question. Can it be done with intermunicipal agreements between Calgary and other municipalities? Yeah, maybe. Will it require the formation of some kind of regional transit authority that includes everyone, or at least much of the region? Possibly. That's what most metropolitan areas have had to do. There's certainly some regional transit systems where the principal city still is largely in charge, but other agreements are in place to extend it beyond the principal city. Austin, Texas, for example, just passed a $7 billion transportation funding measure. So it's not impossible to fund and operate a regional system with the principal city steering and the other cities supporting. Somebody mentioned this in the chat, just in passing, all transit in North America requires public subsidy, almost all. Before and after COVID, there were very few places where transit paid for itself in North America. So there has to be an ongoing source of capital and operating revenue that comes from the people who are benefited by it, and that's usually a good part of the whole region.
Thanks,
But we're not going to try to figure out all those governance issues in this plan. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. So Travis, we'll head over to you and you can unmute yourself there and share your question or comment.
Sure. Can everybody hear me?
We can, thanks.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Thanks for taking the question. My question's about water. I read that by 2036, Calgary's going to have a hard time supplying water to a number of the divisions around the city. And where might we get more? What are the options for people that don't belong to divisions that don't belong to the Calgary water license? Could somebody maybe talk to that?
Steve, you should probably do that one.
Yeah, sure. So a couple of things. First off, is one of the things we want to do with this growth plan is reduce the amount of water that we use. Certainly, a more compact form of development has a lower water use. Now, that's not going to solve all of our problems for sure, but it's a start, and it is something we can influence through a growth plan and how we develop. In terms of the other water issues, there are certainly other opportunities to get water, and I know that there are municipalities out there already that are sharing, outside the city of Calgary, that are coming up with agreements to share water and share licenses. And there are other water providers outside the municipalities that have water licenses that can share. But really, in the end, the biggest thing we want to do is actually reduce the amount of water that we use, so we don't have to rely on trading licenses around that sort of thing. But certainly, part of this plan will be giving some direction around how municipalities should be collaborating and where we think those priorities should be in terms of collaboration to help service the future growth areas to support the next million.
Thanks, Steve. That's great. So Gloria, I'm going to come to you in just a sec. I'm going to pop into one of the questions, though, that we had from Allison, wondering how agricultural areas fit into place types.
Well, there's an agriculture component of the plan. And in fact, there's been a lot of discussion in recent weeks about rural hamlets and how they fit into this plan. They do. They are an element of rural life. One of the characteristics of the Calgary region is that you have an enormous amount of agriculture land, in the region. 7,000 square kilometers. Frankly, most of which is not threatened by development. So unlike other plans where, an urban growth boundary was critical to wall off creeping growth from a very small amount of farmland, high value farmland, that's not the case here. So you have a very large agricultural land resource, mostly for commodity agriculture, but it's farmland, and some of it's endeavor to recognize and it doesn't have to permit, but recognize and support the existence of those rural hubs and the incremental growth, anyway, of the existing rural hamlets. Should there be new rural hamlets? Good question.
Thanks, Charlie. Gloria, if you want to go ahead and take yourself off mute there. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you. I guess my question will go back to you, Jordan, because the other two gentlemen are from the US, and Jordan, you live here and know the basin. The South Saskatchewan River Basin has been closed since 2006. This plan is anticipating handling 1.5 million more people. How do you do that on a river basin that is already closed because it is maxed out?
Thanks for the question, Gloria. A couple things actually. Steve is from Calgary. Charlie's the only non-Calgarian here.
Oops. Okay.
And another point, it's actually for the next million. The same challenge though, in terms of what you look at. So yeah, very correct. Since 2006, the South Saskatchewan Basin has been closed to new licenses, and that is part of I would say, not necessarily included within the plan, but definitely challenges that we are working on with the 10 members in order to address how do you do that? Where is the water going to come from? We have had dialogue as CMRB with Alberta Environmental Protection in terms of we need to not only have the ability for flood resilience, but also drought resilience in terms of structure that is being contemplated on the rivers. And so, yeah, it is definitely a challenge. And the, I would say, positive thing that we have is that we have time to begin to address those challenges and work together and figure out what is the best solutions by collaborating. And excuse me, the second part is that, as Steve kind of already alluded to, if we can reduce water consumption, then we are not actually, as we are adding the next million people, we are not, doubling water consumption for the region, and looking at the demand. And one of CMRB members, Jamie Graves, helped lead a study in terms of demand management and how best to reduce water demand in the region on the go-forward basis.
Thanks, Jordan. And I'm going to follow up on that because Kim's asked a question. So can you just explain how more compact development actually reduces water use? And throw that maybe to Steve or Charlie.
Primarily landscape irrigation. It's number one. Less of it. Higher density development. Yeah.
All right. And so I'm going to pop back in. So we'll take questions now for probably about another 4 minutes before we just wrap and close. So if anybody wants your hands up and your time to speak, if you've been holding off, now is the time. But we certainly have a few other questions to work through as well. So going back to the JPAs, the joint planning areas, for Charlie or Steve. So just a question about, to what extent are the municipalities in agreement with what's being proposed in terms of the joint planning areas and the transit, and how is that paid for? And I think you've addressed it a bit, but we'll just have a more direct question in there.
Yeah, work in progress. And actually, I saw a question pass by that I can address at the same time, which is we're proposing that municipal development plans be brought into compliance with the regional plan. In other words, they're not disconnected from one another, and that there be some kind of review schedule, whether it's the annual provision of numbers saying here's how we're doing with respect to the place types, or a more formal periodic review of every 5 years, where the municipalities will need to have their plans evaluated by the region, and the CMRB staff and board will say, yes, Okotoks, your plan complies with the regional plan. We'll see you in 5 years. So there's going to be some kind of a mechanism like that to gradually bring the local plans and the regional plan together.
Thanks very much. That's helpful. There's been a couple questions on that. Also a question from Cindy about fire protection, policing, and ambulance. So sort of healthcare shared services. Is that within the scope of the plan?
Steve might want to address that, but the short answer is not all municipal services are going to be addressed by the plan, right?
I'll let Jordan take that one, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. And Charlie's correct, not all municipal services are going to be addressed by the plan. I think part of the issue here is, how do you eat a whale one bite at a time? As we go through it, there is a regulated requirement for the growth plan, which has a list of policies that must be included. The servicing is May. And so the servicing plan must support the growth plan. And then the servicing plan may include, and it lists out a whole number of different options. But realistically, almost any service that is provided by a municipality may be included in that. And part of it is just as we figure out the form and as we figure out, so what is it going to look like, then we can start to take a look at, so what other services can be viewed on a more collaborative basis, on a regional basis. One of the things that we are undertaking right now is just a background study on policing in the region. And whether or not there is a good degree of satisfaction with policing or not, and how we progress with that. And while that got a little bit delayed because of the advent of COVID, that is something we are continuing on and intend to feed that into the provincial review of delivery of policing services across the province.
Thanks a lot, Jordan. I'm just going to sneak a couple more in here that I saw that came through along the way. So wondering if Alan had asked if there were other joint planning areas that were considered other than the 3 that have ended up in the proposal.
We looked at others, but we think these 3 are the ones that sort of pass the complexity test, where there are 2 or more, or actually in each case is 3 municipalities that have to work together, and where the development form really requires those 3 to work together for it to achieve its goals. There are other places where cooperation are needed. For example, between Cochrane and Calgary, of course. But these 3 rose to that level, and the others didn't.
Thanks very much. And a question that we had along the way from Karen is, how does the Trans-Canada Highway factor into the overall transportation or transit planning? It seems like the plan doesn't extend west of Calgary for transit.
I can take that one. I guess first off is what we've shown for corridors are primarily where we are suggesting that there be a focus for transit-oriented development corridors or transit-ready corridors, that higher density. It doesn't mean those are the only areas that there would be transit. Part of the recommendation coming out of this is that there be a regional transportation and transit master plan completed that we can get into a little more detail about it. West of the Trans-Canada Highway, of course, there's some plans going on right now about rail to Banff. On it is, there's a question about on it before, but on it is still operating to Banff. And certainly there are opportunities to look at that. And the exclusion of a transit-oriented or a transit-ready corridor to the west doesn't mean that we're excluding transit to the west. We think it should be included, but that's probably one that needs to be addressed through a more detailed master planning exercise, a transportation master plan and a transit master plan. And this regional growth plan can give a little bit of direction to that regional transportation plan that would be a follow-up to this plan, just a little more detail. And it should address transit and transportation issues to the west.
Thanks, Steve. And I'm just going to note Kim's final question here in terms of the water. So what areas are a priority for water and wastewater servicing? Anybody speak to that?
So you're asking?
I'm asking anybody. What areas are a priority for water and wastewater servicing?
Oh, okay. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Really, it's those areas where we expect to see growth. So the joint planning areas are one area that we would be seeing some priority around water and wastewater. And there's been work done in all of those areas already to start moving in that direction. Some of it has been individual municipalities. Other cases, it's been collaboration between municipalities. And we really want to build on those places where that collaboration is already occurring. And then really it's outside of that, a lot of it's within the more urban municipalities. But really is where growth occurs. We would like to see collaboration amongst municipalities on providing water and wastewater servicing in those particular areas.
Awesome, thank you. And thanks to all of you for letting us put you on the hot seat here. That's been helpful. So I'm gonna put one last poll up for the folks who are still with us. And there had been a question that came through of how many people did we have in this call today? We had 70 people register. And at the height of this, we had 41 people who were logged in. So presumably everybody will send a note back out to as well as those who have subscribed to receive updates through the project website that we'll share this recording with, and it'll go up on the website as well. So thank you to the people who are viewing the recording, and hopefully there weren't too many technical glitches for you there. So I'm going to launch this last poll. And again, for those of you for whom the polls aren't working, we'll ask, I'll read out the questions. So just the first one, how did we do? On a scale of 1 to 5, to what degree did this virtual open house meet your expectations? 1 being not at all, 2 being a little bit, 3 being somewhat, 4 being mostly, and 5 being very well. So that's the first question. And thanks, it seems most in that somewhat most very well. And so the second question is, did you learn something new or gain additional understanding after having attended this virtual open house? So yes, no, or not sure. Thanks very much. All right, we did get at least 4 people who said that they learned something new, as I had hoped for. No, hope for more than that. So thanks very much for sticking with us and for asking the questions to build your own understanding. And then the third question is, do you plan to share your thoughts through the engagement website? So yes, no, or I already have. We know a number of you had said that you had already. So thanks very much. And we do definitely want to encourage that involvement to the engagement website. We'll end that poll there. If I've ended it, and I'll share the results with folks as they've come through so you can take a look at them. But if I didn't get your answers and you want to share those comments, please do submit those through the chat. So 88% of you got new information. You're going to go to the website, you're going to share more thoughts. And I really would encourage you to spend some time with the discussion forums. That's sort of where, again, we've said, here's what's being proposed that's different. So it's a shift in the type of country residential, more of something, less of something else, and how that connects back to what we've heard people want to see from that initial 1,600 people who contributed to our engagement in the summer. We would love to have these numbers equally as vibrant for this second phase. So please do encourage your friends and your colleagues and your family members to visit the site and to at least learn about what's being proposed, and to see what other people are saying, and hopefully to share your views as well. The site will be open until November 27th, so until a week from Friday. And following that, next steps of what happens is we, again, take all of the really great comments that we're receiving and sort of that deep qualitative words that people are giving us about what they care about, and we'll take that and review that into themes that will contribute to the policy development. So ultimately, the regional growth plan is about how are we going to manage growth in the Calgary region as we plan for the next 1 million residents. And so everything is leading up to the how in terms of we want to approach that, and what we're wondering is what's important to you in that how. What you'll also see in the survey are those focus areas, questions about those focus areas that Jordan talked about. So for example, water stewardship or celebrating rural-urban differences, those sort of principles that the board has said matter to all of the 10 municipalities in the region. And what the survey includes are questions that say, well, what does that mean to you? What do you think is important about water stewardship? What do you think is important about rural-urban differences? And that will also help inform the direction that board members take as they look beyond the growth plan as well, to the servicing components and to future activity. So the work of the board doesn't stop with the growth plan, and definitely the contributions that you're offering now. Board members have said we'll continue to inform the decisions that they make in the future. So thank you very much. We know that time can be quite precious, and we really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this, to listen to the information, to go through it online, and to share and encourage others to contribute as well. We hope you've enjoyed this, and thanks a lot. Have a safe day, everybody, and take care. Bye.
Thanks, Anne. Thank you all for participating.